Okay, now I want to introduce our special guest experts for today. I'll start with Chrissy Moore. Chrissy is the curator of the National Herb Garden and is a member of the Herb Society of America's Potomac unit. She is also a certified arborist. Trees can be herbal as well, and with the International Society of Arboriculture. As a steward of the National Herb Garden, Chrissy lectures, provides tours, and writes on various herbal topics. She also shepherds the garden's Under the Arbor Educational Outreach Program, which I would encourage all of you to check out. And she is the co-blog master of the Herb Society of America blog. Working in the world's best public herbal classroom for over 20 years has provided Chrissy with countless opportunities to learn new things, which she then shares with the garden's many admirers. And then we also have Erin Holden join us today. Erin also works in the National Herb Garden and holds a Master's of Science in Herbal Medicine from the Maryland University of Integrative Health. She has worked at the Arboretum since 2013, primarily in the Herb Garden and the National Bonsai and Penjing Museum. In 2018, she helped launch Urban Lifestyles, an herbal educational series at the Arboretum that teaches participants how to incorporate herbs into their everyday life. Erin is a clinical herbalist and has served as a teaching assistant for various herbal medicine graduate courses as well. She is also the co-blog master of the Herb Society of America's blog. So with that, I would like to thank Chrissy and Erin for joining us today, and we'll hand it off to them for their presentation. So Chrissy and Erin, take it away.
All right, let's see. As you would have heard, Erin's the smart one in the group. So I'm just the gardener. I follow her lead most of the time. All right. So for those of you, just as an overview, in case you have not been to the National Herb Garden or aren't that familiar with the architecture of it, I'll just do a brief overview. It's 2.5 acres. It's the largest designed herb garden in the United States, possibly the world, but they don't let us out much. So I'm actually not sure if it's the biggest herb garden in the world. Just kidding, maybe not. But in any case, it is 2.5 acres, which is a pretty big herb garden, comparatively speaking, to most that you see at other arboreta or botanical gardens. It's broken up into 4 different rooms. If you can see my mouse over here, the A is our entrance garden, and that includes the interior and the exterior. The knot garden, K-N-O-T, that is a Tudor style, Elizabethan era style knot garden, which is currently growing in from some renovation we did last fall. C here is the historic rose garden. And then the part that we're probably homing in on the most today is D, this section here. This is our 10 theme gardens, and that's where we break down our definition of an herb into 10 broad categories that help people understand what we mean by and what is an herb. And Anne asked earlier, what is an herb exactly? And here is your definition, Anne. Any plant that is useful to humans or enhances their lives. So for example, like we need water to live so that we don't grow water, which not that we could anyway, but in any case, except for plants used solely for ornament or food. So the herb can be ornamental. A lot of herbs are very pretty and attractive, and we like those. Not all of them are, though. But herbs and spices are flavoring food. We don't grow plants just for consumption. So for example, we don't grow green peppers in there because we're eating that just for sustenance purposes. So any other plants that we use for culinary things are going to be for flavoring the food that we eat. We're going to break this talk down into, Erin's going to do a few plants, then I'm going to do a few. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin. I'm going to scoot my rear end out of the way and let her get started.
Okay. To start with, my favorite plant family is the nightshade family, and I cannot pass up an opportunity to talk about these plants. And today I've picked deadly nightshade as a representative of that family, because specifically it's a plant that really epitomizes that paraphrase saying the dose makes the poison. I mean, the whole family kind of does that, but this plant in particular. And that's really sort of captured in the name as well. So Atropa, the genus, is named after Atropa, who of the three fates in Greek mythology cuts the thread of life. And the specific epithet belladonna translates to beautiful woman, which references the practice of Venetian women in the 1500s using juice of the berries in their eyes to dilate their pupils, which was the fashion at the time. So even in the name of the plant, you start to get a hint of the dichotomy that's represented in it. And deadly nightshade has been known and used for a very long time. There's the suggestion that it appears in the Odyssey as the drug that the witch Circe used to turn Odysseus's men into pigs. Although it may have been a different nightshade plant, maybe even mandrake. Yes, the Harry Potter mandrake. And it often gets confused with mandrake in the historical literature. But Dioscorides, who was a Greek physician in the 1st century AD, he did recognize that there was a difference between these two plant medicines. And even though mandrake itself is a pretty dangerous plant to use, he suggested that deadly nightshade was much more poisonous and should not be used as a substitute. And as you can see on the screen, some of the older scientific names for this plant really underscore its dangerous reputation. You have things like Solanum lethale and Solatrum mortale, so lethal and deadly, kind of come across. And descriptions of the behavior of followers of Dionysus, who was a Greek god of wine, fertility, and ritual madness, has led some historians to believe that belladonna was mixed in with the wine that was consumed during these bacchanalian festivities. And one quote says that devotees passed into a trance in which they danced with abandon and committed lewd and libidinous acts. And belladonna was known to cause things like delirium and narcosis and even death. And so it became associated with the devil as one of his favorite plants. And one of the common names was even devil's berries. And he favored it so much that he was said to constantly watch over it and tend to it, sprinkling it with his own blood and taking cuttings of it. So it wasn't a far leap from being associated with the devil to being used by witches to make things like flying ointment in the Middle Ages. And flying ointment was reputedly made by mixing belladonna, mandrake, henbane, which is another nightshade plant, and hemlock with bear's grease, and then rubbing that all over the body. And the alkaloids in these plants, which are like the active constituents in the plants, were absorbed through the skin and the mucous membranes and cause things like hallucinations, the sensation of flying, and sexual arousal. So it's really easy to see the association between the medieval witches' use of the plant and the earlier cult of Dionysus. And it's also been said that witches practice divination by eating small amounts of belladonna. So even though it was used illicitly in witchcraft, herbalists did recognize that belladonna had medicinal applications. And one herbal in the 1500s described its properties, the properties of the leaves and fruits as cold and to be used externally for inflammations of various kinds. And in the 1800s, it was used for things like palsy, apoplexy, which is an old term for stroke, epilepsy, whooping cough, and hydrophobia, which is an old term for rabies. And some of these uses make sense because things like palsy and whooping cough and hydrophobia, because atropine, which is the main alkaloid in belladonna, can inhibit smooth muscles, especially like those in the lungs, so it would calm things like whooping cough. And it also can inhibit salivation, which is a hallmark sign of rabies. And so around this time, a belladonna infusion was also being used to dilate the pupils for cataract removal, which marks the beginning of it being used in eye surgeries, which is really interesting because atropine is still used today in ophthalmology to dilate pupils during eye exams. So from the mid-1800s to about the mid-1900s, belladonna was incorporated into medicinal plasters that were used for painful applications like neuralgia, myalgia, rheumatism, that sort of thing. And some of these plasters also contained an extract of monkshood, which has a dangerous alkaloid itself called aconitine. And murderers would buy these plasters and steep out the aconitine and the atropine, and then use this steeped out extract for their nefarious purposes. And unfortunately, in addition to murders, things like suicides and even accidental poisonings resulted from the use of these plasters, as well as the belladonna eye drops. All right, so since it's such a deadly, dangerous plant, internal use was not recommended because it could cause things like rage and death. Some people even cautioned against planting the plant in the garden, as the fruits were thought to be particularly attractive to women and children who may eat the berries and then succumb to the effects of that. So this little rhyme here describes the symptoms of belladonna overdose. So we have hot as a hare, which references a fever that can be brought on by consuming belladonna. Blind as a bat, caused by the pupil dilation, and atropine can also paralyze the little muscles in the eyes. So pretty much just kind of staring straight ahead with these huge dilated pupils, not being able to see anything. Dry as a bone, again, the decreased salivation and also severe thirst. Red as a beet, because atropine can cause vasodilation of the blood vessels in the skin. So you get this flushing of the face and the flushing of the skin, this redness. And then mad as a hen, which refers to the bizarre mental state and agitation and hallucinations that can be brought on by atropine and belladonna consumption. And belladonna can also cause a high heart rate, which will come into play just a little bit later. All right, so most of that was the poisonous dose side of the coin. But like I mentioned, atropine is used today during eye exams to dilate the pupils, and it's also used in hospital settings to reduce salivation and bronchial secretions during surgery, and to increase a heart rate that's dropped too low. And in addition to that, it's issued to the US military in what are called nerve agent antidote kits, because atropine can counteract the effects of some organophosphate nerve agents like sarin gas that's used in chemical warfare. That's a pretty interesting use of this really dangerous and deadly plant. All right, so moving on to the next plant that I want to talk about is Senegalia senegal, which used to be called Acacia Senegal. And this is the plant from which we get gum acacia, also called gum arabic. And gum acacia is a resin that's produced by the tree. So the farmer comes along and taps the tree or wounds the bark in some way, and then as a response, the tree oozes out this sap, this resin that's then collected and harvested and sold. And if any of you have ever heard of gum acacia, this is probably why. It is absolutely everywhere. It's found in everything from shoe polish to soda, candy, pharmaceuticals, paint, as a fiber supplement. There's a reason that we grow it in the industrial bed, because it is so critically important to so many industries. So I went to the store the other day, and these are just a few of the products that had it listed on the label. You can see it's from gum, candy, soda. There's a variety of sodas here, and even though Coke and Pepsi specifically didn't have it listed, it is widely acknowledged in the literature and in the gum acacia industry that those two companies are very large consumers of the product. So why in the world do so many random products contain gum acacia? What does it do? Well, its main function is as an emulsifier, and an emulsifier binds together two liquids that wouldn't otherwise stay together, which is called an emulsion. And mayo is sort of that classic example of an emulsion, where you've got oil and water that normally don't like to stay mixed together, but then you add eggs into the mix, and that's the emulsifier that blends together and sticks the other two together. So in soda, gum acacia acts as that emulsifier. It keeps the sugar suspended throughout the whole drink so that it doesn't all precipitate to the bottom of the glass or the bottle as it's sitting there on the shelf in the grocery store. And it's also used in paints and inks, in a similar way, it binds together the pigments, and it also helps the pigment adhere to the paper or whatever medium that you're painting on. And gum acacia also is used as an edible coating for things like candies, cereals, and various pharmaceuticals. And it's been used for a really long time. Ancient Egyptians used it in the mummification process and also in cosmetics and in ink. So about 70% of the world's gum acacia comes from Sudan. And the trees also grow in Senegal, Chad. You can see this, all these countries here on this map, and this is known as the gum belt. But since so much of it comes from Sudan, it is a huge crop and a huge industry in that country, and it supports thousands, if not millions of people, both directly and indirectly. And for industries like the soda industry, it is so indispensable that when the US imposed sanctions on Sudan in the 90s and 2000s, gum acacia was exempt from those sanctions. I think it may have even been the only thing that was exempt from those sanctions. However, the war in Sudan and the recent increase of violence in that area have really threatened the supply of the gum for a few reasons. One, gas is prohibitively expensive to the farmers and the people who live there. Transportation right now is incredibly risky and dangerous for people who are trying to transport the product. And people right now are really just more concerned with surviving from day to day, finding food and water, than they are about harvesting and moving gum acacia to where it needs to go. So right now, soda companies apparently have about a 3 to 6 month stockpile of gum acacia to use. But after that, we might be seeing a shortage of a lot of random products that contain this really essential gum. So we'll see how this kind of plays out in the near future. All right, so the last plant that I want to talk about, I picked because it has sort of a fun story to it. So as Craven mentioned, Chrissy and I both co-managed the blog for the Herb Society of America. And a few years ago, we posted an article about chia, which is a salvia species. So it's related to garden sage. And one of my former herb school teachers saw the article and reached out saying, hey, I was driving through rural eastern North Carolina recently, and I passed through hundreds of acres of what I think is chia based on the photos of this article that you guys posted. So she sent me some photos, and it turned out not to be chia, but clary sage, which is another salvia species. So Chrissy and I are wondering why in the world anyone would be growing so much of this stuff, and in North Carolina of all places. So was it used for the essential oil industry? Like, what is going on here? So I did a little bit more digging, and those fields are actually the result of 3 factors kind of converging and coming together over time. And the first factor, starting back in the 1960s with the North Carolina Tobacco Company, R.J. Reynolds. So they'd been using an oriental tobacco, also called Turkish tobacco, in their cigarette blends because it had a certain flavor that they were really going for and looking for. And they'd become concerned about a potential shortage of this specific type of tobacco. So to head that off, they started looking around for alternatives that they could substitute it with. And they discovered that clary sage contains a chemical called sclarea, and that can be processed into something else called sclereolide. And that sclereolide is the exact same chemical that's present in the Turkish tobacco that gives it that flavor that they were looking for. So they thought that they were good to go. They bought a bunch of land in North Carolina and planted hundreds of acres of clary sage. They built a factory to process all this stuff, and boom, they were good to go. But that shortage that they were anticipating never happened, and so eventually the factory shut down. Enter factor number 2. So historically, the perfume industry used to use a fixative called ambergris, which is produced in the digestive tract of sperm whales. And basically a fixative fixes a fragrance to your skin in this case, so that you smell nice for a few hours instead of just a few minutes. And it also has this earthy kind of animalic smell to it that it imparts to any kind of perfume product that it's used in. But in the early 1970s, the US banned the use of ambergris. So the industry instead turned to a synthetic alternative, ambroxide. And guess what ambroxide is synthesized from? You guessed it, sclarea. So in 1978, a German company asked if R.J. Reynolds would get back into the Clary Sage business to meet this new demand. And you can see in this photo, this gentleman here is posing with a few really large chunks, essentially a small fortune of ambergris. This stuff is like $10,000 a pound or something if you find it floating around on the beach. So it's quite an expensive product. And you can also see here a few different perfumes that the synthetic version is used in. So things that you've probably heard of: Eternity for Men by Calvin Klein. We've got a Polo brand and a Versace brand of perfume. Okay, so that was number 2, and enter factor number 3. So once upon a time, phosphates were used in laundry and dishwasher detergents. But as many of you here probably know, when phosphates get into the water, it promotes like an overgrowth of algae blooms that can cause massive fish die-off. So detergent companies removed phosphates and switched to an enzyme-based solution, which cleaned the clothes really well, but made them smell pretty awful. So enter scented detergents. And with the advent of scented detergent, the industry implemented what's known as a 2-week standard, meaning that your clothes should still smell fresh out of the dryer for 14 days after you do laundry. And how do they accomplish that? With a fixative, and sclareolide in particular, which is just another reason for all these fields to exist. And it's now in things like dryer sheets, specifically this brand of Downy Refresh dryer sheets, detergents, Febreze, shampoo, all sorts of things. So all of these factors came together, and now there's around 25,000 acres of Clary Sage grown in North Carolina to make sure that we're not walking around stinking, which if anyone has ever worked around Clary Sage, you know that it's kind of ironic because Clary Sage smells like BO. And with that, I'm going to hand things off to Chrissy.
All right. If you haven't figured out by now, our favorite plants are not rosemary, well, I guess sage, but a different kind of sage,
Yeah.
or thyme, or anything unusual. I mean, usual. We always have to go for the oddball stuff in the herb garden. And it's probably because we're so used to seeing echinacea and basil all the time that we're like, we know those plants already. So I was going to mention that one of my most important criteria, my most important criterion for a favorite plant is the human-plant interaction, which you can see from Erin's talk too. So when I'm going through the herb garden, I'm always trying to figure out which plant tells that human-plant relationship story the best. Those are the ones that I seek out to tell the visitors and whatnot. So, whether a plant's impact ebbs and flows over the years doesn't really matter, as long as it can tell a story that, how this plant impacts life, we're good with that. And my first one, Musa textilis. And I will point out, this is why scientific names are really important, because they tell you a lot about a plant. As you can tell, this abaca is a banana relative, but it is not actually a banana. It doesn't produce edible fruit. Instead, it's most famous for the fiber that's acquired from it, hence the specific epithet. The Philippines is the #1 exporter of abaca, also called abaca hemp, while the largest importers of abaca fiber are the United States, the UK, Germany, and Japan. The trees grow about 8 to 20 feet tall, which is important when you consider their use as a textile fiber. There are very few fibers out there in the world that produce fibers quite that long. The farmers grow them in groves, and they are a renewable resource, just like other timber products. and historically the trees are chopped down, and just remember that palm trees are trees, not big grassy things. So the trees are chopped down, the tops are removed, and the long leaf sheaths are peeled away layer by layer. Here's another example of it kind of up close. Almost looks like a leek, the different layers laid on top of each other. Many farmers do this manually, although bigger operations will actually have machinery that can do this process for them. Next, the leaf sheaths are pulled through this primitive looking extruder. It actually looks like a machete tied up there, but it removes all of the pulp and the leaves and leaves the fibers behind. You can see them hanging up behind the gentleman there. Some of the fibers are 8 to 10 feet long, like I said, which is pretty unusual in the textile world. In the old days, this is how everything ended up in central receiving, so to speak. So a very early version of that. These fellows almost look like Sherpas here. And I just literally looked this morning. I don't know if you can see, here's the fellow's hat hanging up at the top of his bundle there. Today, though, this is a little bit more what it looks like in central receiving. Abaca fibers are the strongest natural fiber in usage today, 3 times stronger than sisal. And if you've seen any sisal rugs around, you know how tough those things are. They almost cut your feet if you walk on them barefoot. I'm not sure why people recommend them for your family room, but okay. Abaca is even stronger than nylon and rayon. Because it does really well in saltwater situations, it historically has been used by navies and merchant ships for ropes and sailcloth, even for dredging and ocean exploration. Because it's a natural fiber, it's also more environmentally friendly than nylon cordage, but despite that, nylon has mostly replaced abaca rope now in marine situations. Like I said, the Philippines is the largest producer of abaca fibers, supplying about 87% of the world's requirement for the production of cordage and specialty papers, things like that, textiles, furniture, fixatives, all kinds of things. You could look it up online for the textile associations, and they can list out a whole bunch of things. But the ones that I have on here, I just wanted you to see a picture of what the fiber looks like sort of up close. But I don't think I've ever seen one fiber being incorporated into so many different products and this is only just a handful of them. You've got up here on the right is the Japanese yen currency note. And I mentioned earlier that one of the largest importers is Japan. And likely that's because their yen note is made up of 30% abaca fiber. Again, it's used to make things like tea bags and other bags like that. If you're vegetarian, it is a useful casing for your meatless deli meats. So that works for you guys. And then the coolest one lately, I've seen a number of car companies sort of branching out into this world here, but Mercedes-Benz has used a blend of polypropylene thermoplastic. Yes, that's a mouthful. Erin's the chemist over there. She could probably explain that to me better. But anyway, they mix the plastics with the abaca yarn in auto body parts as a replacement for fiberglass. It's more environmentally friendly production, and it's easier for recycling of the body parts. It also lowers the weight of the car, which increases fuel efficiency, which I think is something we can all appreciate today. Okay, so here's your trivia about abaca. It has uses across many industries. Obviously, I just mentioned a number of them. But in this country, it is probably most famous for this product. The hint is its other name is Manila hemp. I said it was grown primarily in Philippines. If you've done any office work, you may know the answer to this. So I'm going to give you some Jeopardy music here and see if you guys can come up with the answer to that. And because we're on a time limit, your Jeopardy music is over now. And your answer is manila envelopes and folders. I purposefully didn't give you the other common name because I didn't want you to guess it too early. Some of you are really smarter than me. But I've always wondered why, actually for a long time, I didn't wonder why they were called manila envelopes and folders. For some reason, it didn't cross my mind. I guess I'm a little slow, but I wonder if any of you have ever considered why these particular office products were called manila And I was, as a kid, I thought it was Manila vanilla, like vanilla. Maybe they're called Manila because they're yellow. I don't know. In any case, I thought that was one of the coolest things out there. And this is one of the main reasons why I love herbs, because when you really start digging into plants, you find all these really interesting stories or different connections, tendrils of uses that are all around the world, and things that you never really thought of before. So here you've got this abaca or Musa textilis that is in everything from office products to Mercedes-Benz. So talk about the low end of the spectrum to the high end of the spectrum. My next plant, cotton. See, I told you we don't go for anything usual around here. And most people would think cotton is sort of ho-hum. But this is actually one of my favorite plants to share with visitors. And this fascination began when I was a child. Some of you may be familiar with this movie. I saw it decades ago, and I never forgot the storyline. The cotton had to be harvested or the farm would be lost. And that was just amongst a whole host of other themes, of course. And who knew that Sally Field was so short? Okay, anyway, the work was excruciatingly difficult, unforgiving, and physically wounding. And as a kid, I had never been around cotton before, but I learned what picking cotton could do to human hands through watching this movie. When I had the opportunity to walk through a cotton field in North Carolina during college, Craven, did you know that we were going to be doing all these North Carolina plants for you? So just so you know, we're doing a little kissing up to Craven today. Just kidding. Anyway, so I was able to walk through a cotton field just sort of randomly. My friend and I were driving by and I was like, what is that? And she pulled over and I started wandering around in this field, like, you know, Field of Glory or wait, Field of Dreams, whatever that movie was. Anyway. And I felt for the first time, you know, I'd seen the movie, but I was like, whoa, this is a crazy plant with this hardened, spiny cotton ball on there. And then the fibers and the seeds in there, these things were kind of like burned into my memory. And then here I come, you know, fast forward, you know, 10 years or something, and I'm working in the National Herb Garden. And what are we growing but cotton? So this was a plant that I really felt was important to share with the visitors over the years. There are two main elements from the cotton plant that humans have used with great regularity. One of them is cottonseed oil extracted from the seed, obviously. And then there's the cotton fiber or the lint, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. Each fiber develops from a single cell on the surface of the cotton seed. And when I first heard that, I thought that was pretty crazy. Every little piece of lint is starting from one cell on the seed surface. The fiber itself is a thin-walled tube that thickens with deposits of cellulose. Now remember that because I'm going to mention it again. Cellulose inside the tube, kind of like your arteries getting clogged. When the growth ends for that fiber, the living part of the fiber dies. And then the fiber collapses upon itself and then twists, like you can see in this micrograph here. That twisting upon itself aspect actually gives the fiber strength, particularly when spun into thread for weaving cloth. All right, so here's your next trivia question. Which country exports the greatest amount of cotton in the world? Doody-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo. Okay, here's your answer. Ta-da! The United States, believe it or not. And now for the bonus question, which I don't have up here, which state in the United States produces the greatest amount of cotton? Okay, more time. The answer is Texas. And I was shocked. For some reason, I didn't ever realize that Texas grew that much cotton until I visited the state and saw plenty of it growing. So there you go. So that was your Jeopardy interlude. Sorry, moving on. Back to the cotton lint. We already know it has myriad uses. You know, I'm sure you can rattle off quite a few. Here's, you know, the ubiquitous cotton balls and cotton swabs or coffee filters, bolts of fabric, you know, and even your kitchen string to hold your bouquet garni if you're into herbs in your stew. But what about this? You remember these? It wasn't that long ago that we used these things with regularity. I know as a kid, I remember doing the film strips there and they would always come flying out and the teacher would get mad and the kids were sitting there throwing spitballs while we waited for the film strip to get back in place again. But today, these things are nearly obsolete. And what about these? These products we work with almost daily. And in fact, they're so common, we probably never even think twice about them, except maybe when the cling wrap refuses to give way or we can't open that stinking package when we're really hungry. But what do all of these products have in common? And that is cellulose. Again, all of these products are derivatives of cellulose, and cotton fiber is more than 90% cellulose, whereas wood fiber is 40 to 50% cellulose, which is a little backwards, one would think. Celluloid, or the more proper name for celluloid, is nitrocellulose. If you can remember that name, you might think of gun cotton or even explosives. It was originally used for movie filmmaking up until the mid-1930s. One of the downsides to celluloid is that it's highly flammable, no kidding. And many a film collection was lost due to its combustibility. Now, later iterations of the cellulose film were much more stable. Read, they didn't explode as much. But cellulose is converted by many chemical processes into products we know well, like cling film and even lacquer for wood products. And what about this scenario? Okay, here's everybody, I think, unless you're really a locomotive fan, this might throw you off a good bit. But here's the brief version of this story. My friend alerted me to an interesting use of cotton one day when he, his wife, and I were visiting the Strasburg Railroad in Pennsylvania. He casually said in conversation that the journal box on steam locomotives was packed with cotton waste. And I literally stopped in my tracks, no pun intended, when he said that, because I had no idea what cotton waste was, let alone a journal box, of course. So I requested a more detailed explanation, which they both happily provided, of course, being, nerdy birds about their respective topics. But you may recall the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911 in Manhattan, where 146 people died. The cause of the fire is still somewhat of a mystery, but essentially 2 weeks worth of the cotton scraps or waste from the shirt making process was piled up under the garment cutting tables. The waste is basically a byproduct of the fabric industry. And this waste, from wherever it was derived, was a crucial part of the functioning of locomotives. Prior to the invention and implementation of ball bearings, which you see here on the right, in many pieces of machinery, including trains, the axle was attached to this circular object here on the left. And this is what made the wheels turn. So envision your wheelbarrow and the wheel axle in it. It's a pretty simple mechanism, but as you might imagine, metal on metal wouldn't last very long in a situation like a locomotive. So they packed this journal box, you can see it's the box here. They packed this journal box with scraps or bits of cotton waste, which you see down here, that had been soaked in oil. This lubricated the machinery so it would turn smoothly and then by extension not catch on fire. And there's a specific terminology that they use in the railroad industry for, hey, you're on fire, dude, you need to stop and throw some water on it. But in any case, but today we use the much improved system of ball bearings. So we all know that you're not out shopping for oily rags to stuff in your car wheels, but this idea of cotton waste became intriguing for me. What about all of that fabric that we're not using? What about those clothes that we're not wearing anymore? Like those jeans from high school that we're convinced we're going to get back into again? Yeah, not so much. Well, we ordered some plants not that long ago from a nursery in North Carolina. Craven, here we go again. And when the box came, I was really surprised to see this new packing material. So this nursery ends up using these blue jeans stuffed into this little plastic bag, and this is what they're using instead of packing peanuts. It's made from recycled jeans. And I thought to myself, well, this is really interesting use of the plant. And not only do they have it in here, but they also packed it around the plants themselves to keep the soil from coming out. So as you can see on the bag here, it says, they've already had a second life, those blue jeans, and they're ready for a third. Well, of course, my mind's always going, how can I use this again? And I thought, well, maybe I could be a good ornithologist and set it out for the birds to use in their nests, or Maybe I should help the mice out and just stuff it preemptively in my car engine, give them a head start, and maybe I could cut some wires in there while I'm at it. I don't know. We can just think of other ways of using this to help the wildlife, whatever, not end up in the landfill. But switching gears from old to new, more recently, new cotton research has produced a gauze product that is even more wound protective and essentially life-saving than before. It's pretty impressive, actually. We've likely all used cotton gauze or bandages at one time or another on ourselves or someone else. So if you've worked in or around the medical sector at all, this may pique your interest. One of the interesting things about working for the Agricultural Research Service is that we get to see new products, technology, information, what have you, come across our desks from the ARS labs all the time, often before the general public is aware of them. And oftentimes the public isn't ever aware of what ARS is working on, and things that actually improve their lives every day. So it was cool to me when I saw this come across, of course, because I love cotton and everything, but this multidisciplinary team from New Orleans determined that cotton fibers that have not been scoured and bleached, like I mentioned, the cotton balls, whatever, those are bright white. Those have been scoured of all funk on them and bleached to get them nice bright white, because, for some reason that equals sterility to us, I guess, and cleanliness. Cleanliness is next to godliness in our cotton balls. But in any case, what they found is that cotton fibers that have not been scoured and bleached, but have their cuticles still intact, stimulate the body's production of fibrin and other blood clotting agents. The gauze is also more absorbent than standard gauze, which triggers more blood clotting. It sheds fewer fibers into the wound, which is really interesting as well. And the coolest thing about it is that it also releases small amounts of hydrogen peroxide. So in essence, you're sort of cleaning the wound without dumping the hydrogen peroxide on it directly. So if, uncontrolled bleeding or hemorrhaging is the #1 cause of preventable death in persons who experience traumatic injury. So that makes this new cotton product useful for a battlefield triage, on accident scenes, or even if you're in remote locations where getting to a medical facility in a timely manner is unlikely. So this product is actually useful in both military and civilian applications and is considered a valuable item to have in your first aid or triage kit. Oops, sorry. Cotton, will never lose its industrial use, obviously, but I also like to show people that a plant can be strong in character as well as in beauty, and is a wonderful lesson when the visitors walk through. I enjoy showing the visitors the softer side of cotton. Again, no pun intended. I've got a lot of these today, apparently. I like to show the softer side of cotton alongside its hard historical past. And in this photo, you can see the diversity within the species, whereby we can have not just white cotton fibers, but green and brown as well, and variegated foliage and flowers. So it truly is a great plant. Now, surprise, this is my last plant. So I know I'm going to go fast. Pomegranate is a plant that I have known for a long time, but it was never really on my radar until about 10 years ago. My rationale may not be of interest to anyone but myself, but that's what makes herb stories so personal. Different plants resonate with different people or for different reasons, which is also why you answer the question on what's your favorite herb to use. It's very personal for a lot of people. But first, a little back history on it. Sturtevant wrote in his Notes on Edible Plants, this is a book that came out in the early 1900s, that historically pomegranates were believed to aid procreation, increase in abundance on account of their many seeds. So you can see the symbolism there. The fruit also served as models for the temple decorations in Jerusalem and on the hem of the high priest's robe. So you can see down here the little bells, and these little doodahs here are symbolic of pomegranates. So the plant found great favor in the ancient world, but years later, the juice was used to make grenadine syrup, which is a mixture of pomegranate juice, sugar, and water. Unfortunately, most grenadine syrups today are using artificial flavors, so you'd probably have to go to a Middle Eastern market in order to get something a bit more authentic. That's all well and good, but grenadine syrup as an interesting topic of discussion is just kind of meh, so what? The real reason why pomegranate is one of my favorite plants is from a completely different topic. before too long, let's see, I was watching some show, I think, on TV. This was a number of years ago. And it was like a period piece from the 18th century, what have you. And then there was some military action and, the long guns were brought out and stuff. And for some reason, my brain went to when were guns introduced into military applications as opposed to, say, bows and arrows. So I thought, well, I don't know that much about military history as much as I would like, I guess. But so I decided to do a deep dive in there. Of course, then I went down the rabbit hole trying to figure this out. And before too long, I was reading about the military branch of soldiers called grenadiers that were popularized in Spain and Austria, but which then spread to other European countries. And perhaps you've heard of them. I don't think it's necessarily a really strange terminology, but they were equivalent to today's military special forces. And their mission was to throw grenades at specific targets to weaken the enemy's strongholds, hence the name grenadier. The term grenade is French in origin and receives its name from the pomegranate. And at that time, the grenades looked similar to pomegranate fruit. And you can see the similarities here. And one of the other cool side facts, and again, this is how intertwined plants are. Let me back up real quick. So I'm going to show you something. In this picture, you can see this is actually not quite accurate, that this gentleman has this trident hat on here. The grenadiers, because they were often throwing the grenades and they had the guns, they would often have to sling their gun around onto their shoulder, get it out of the way, pull out the grenade and throw it. Well, unfortunately, in the process of winging their arms all around, they would often knock their hats off because of the shape. So the grenadiers ended up getting this hat shape on the left in order to avoid losing their hat on the battlefield. And I thought that was a pretty cool fashion statement, if you will, that is slightly impacted by pomegranate and grenade use. I know it's a stretch, but still it was an interesting factoid. In any case, this relationship between the pomegranate and grenades and grenadine and grenadiers and all these things was so intertwined that in some countries, the grenadiers were issued stylized pomegranates for their cap patches or brooch pins as part of their official uniforms. So very few people, I imagine, are aware of such military details. I certainly wasn't, but I am absolutely fascinated by the notion that plants can be found in the most obscure places throughout history, and they continue to inspire even today. So if only we were tuned in enough to see them, we might actually be a little more fascinated by plants than we currently are. And as stewards of the herb garden, I think that's the role that Erin and I play, is that we do the research, the digging and all that stuff for our visitors so that we can tell the plant stories for them, tell people about their cool use. I'm looking over here at Erin because I'm thinking she's probably agreeing with me at this point, but it's a constant state of learning for us, how these plants impact people's lives all through the centuries on human history. And hopefully, if you haven't been to the herb garden, you could swing in someday and maybe learn a few stories for yourselves, or hit us up and we'll give you a personal tour around. But having said that, I want to say this is the end because we have to be quick about things. But these are a few of the plants that Erin and I both think are really good stories. And hopefully you learn something different today other than just about using basil and rosemary in your cooking. Something different here. So with that, I will turn it back over to the FONA staff and stop sharing my screen, and we can do some Q&A if you wish.
Okay. Well, Chrissy and Erin, thank you so much. I mean, what a great presentation. And you've certainly educated me, and I would imagine everyone else, with your vast knowledge of herbs and the National Herb Garden, and a lot of things that I did not expect to learn today, I learned. So thank you again, very, very much. And I agree with you. Everything comes back to North Carolina, Chrissy. So I appreciate you you mentioning that.
Well, Creven, now you have to go back to North Carolina and with fresh eyes on the things happening in your state.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Okay, so we've got some questions here in the chat. I'll read them to you. Hopefully we'll be able to get some answers here. First is, so how has the war in the Sudan affected the production and distribution of gum in the southern Sudan, which, although troubled, has been a favored ally of the U.S.?
It seems like in general, just transporting the gum across the country and across Africa itself to get to the port Sudan, where all the gum leaves Sudan to get to the rest of the country, and I mean the rest of the world, to distributors. It seems like that whole process has really been disrupted by the violence itself. So I'm not sure if that really answered the question, but just transport in general, the farmers are not really able to pick it and transport it and get it out to the rest of the world.
That answers the question about the Sudan, but not about South Sudan. So
I think just
perhaps you
all of
don't
it leaves
have
from that one
any
port.
updated information about that.
I think that all of the gum Arabic leaves from this one port in Africa.
Port Sudan. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for that. Can you spell the fixative from Clary Sage? And I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce this, but sclerade, maybe?
Yeah, let me
Sclarea.
track it down and I'll spell it for you. It might be easier to type in the chat if people are interested. I don't know
Here, let me,
if I read it and you
Get
want
it
to
up.
type it since you're right there.
so I'm gonna type it, what is it, Erin?
We are.
I'm sending this to Anne, so hopefully she'll translate it out. Isn't it sclerioride?
So here's scleriol,
Scleriol, okay.
and then that's scleriol.
Okay, so I sent that to Anne. Okay.
Thank you. All right, that'll be here in the chat in a moment. All right, can ambergris be suspended in amber? I have a necklace of old amber beads. Might they include ambergris?
I don't think so. So the term amber is just sort of like a prefix. And all ambergris is from sperm whales. So they regurgitate it, or it gets excreted in some way from the whales. And then it bobs around on the ocean for a really long time and then washes up on the beach. And amber is actually just like tree resin that is exuded from a tree from a wound. So I don't think that the two could necessarily come in contact with each other.
All right, is Apica a fair trade product? It might be referring to the acacia gum, but do you know anything about the fair trade?
I don't.
Okay.
Do you?
I do not. No, I'll have to put that in my notes to look up.
Okay. All right, let's see. We got, I think, one more here. Can you grow pomegranates in the DC area?
Yes, there are a number of cultivars that are available. If you come to the herb garden, we have a couple that we particularly like that produce fruit. So if you are interested in the fruit versus just the ornamental varieties that do flowers and no fruit, we'd be more than happy to point those out to you. They're pretty hardy. One of the cultivars is a bit more cold sensitive and it might die back a bit. So if you're concerned, maybe put it in a slightly more sheltered area, but you can definitely have cultivars that work in DC. And yeah.
A lot of very nice comments to both of you. Thanking you for your participation today and all the great information that you have shared. And I would second that too. I would tell all of you that Chrissy and Erin have been great friends to FONA in my time as executive director, and we're so thankful for everything they do to support what we do so we can support what they do. But again, a wonderful presentation, and we're right at 1 o'clock, so we're going to wrap things up. But thanks to all of you participants as well for joining us today. And as always, keep an eye out for future digging events. I'm sure we'll have some this fall. And if you're interested in our FONA Field Notes, our weekly newsletter, you can sign up with that address there on the screen. And don't forget about the Dinner Under the Stars on September the 19th. It is a fabulous dinner and event, and we would love for you to join us. All right, so one last thank you to Chrissy and Erin for their participation today, and all of you for being with us, and continue your support of FONA, and visit the Arboretum. Come out and see us whenever you can, and hope you have a wonderful end of your summer and a great fall too. So thanks to everyone.